Give me a sec to get on my Borg stuff. Ooh, that's on. Okay. All right, great. Thanks, everybody, for showing up today. It's great to have this many people out on a Saturday, especially. And thanks for Josh and Justin for inviting me to come out to this. I'm peripherally familiar with the BSides conferences, mostly by sitting staring at the screen wistfully, wishing I was at one. And so it's great to actually to be at one. So we'll just go ahead and press on. So a brief introduction about myself. I'm with Dell SecureWorks. It's kind of an awesome place to work. And I've got a really cool title, Senior InfoSec Researcher. I've been involved with information security for, if my math is correct, 26 years. I started in 1989. Who was born after 1989? Yeah, okay. So I don't feel too terribly old. So that probably explains why I just had no idea how to use Uber. That's probably the explanation right there. No, I'll walk. Yeah. I've written a couple books. You might recognize the cover. One of the issues I've had with the publisher is that even though the covers have different title, they all have the same color. So I'll take a new book that was just published, and I've got the only copies with me, and I'll have them at a presentation, and somebody goes, no, it's okay, I've got that. I was like, how did you get this book? It's like, I went to the bookstore like a year ago and bought it. No. And I tried to explain, you got to do something about the colors and the color scheme. But yeah, this is 4th edition of Windows Forensic Analysis. Has anybody seen that? Has anybody looked at that? Has anybody got like a crease in the spine at all? Anybody? I know my first wife read like one chapter of the first book, and after that, she just doesn't go beyond the dedication page. So, but that's okay. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about lateral movement today. Is everybody familiar with lateral movement? Okay. Guys like me, for me, lateral movement is Michael Jackson doing the moonwalk across the stage, right? What is lateral movement? Anybody?
East-west traffic in a network.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. East-west traffic in a network. That's a good way to start thinking about this. And to give you all a little bit of background, when I originally was contacted by Justin to do a presentation, I was going to do it with no notes. And then I started thinking, wow, the talk I was coming up with was just kind of not the right approach I wanted to take. When I give presentations like this, what I like to do is give you all something that you can use when you leave. So what I'm going to do is give a revamped presentation that I gave once this spring. There's a little bit different information, a little bit more information in it. But the idea is that in 2012, I was at the DoD Cybercrime Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was just hanging around some of the other attendees, and I heard a couple guys talking. And what they said, one of the guys said was, there are 6 presentations here with APT in the title, and not a single one tells us anything. And I started thinking about that. You're at a conference with a bunch of people that investigate these types of instances for the public sector and the private sector, federal government, all that. And you got all these presentations going on. I sat through 3 of them. In fact, I sat through, and I guess I'll just share this because the company no longer exists, the H.B. Gary presentation. Okay? And the guy speaking said, yeah, the bad guys move laterally. And somebody raised their hand and says, what does that look like on my network? And the response was, the bad guys move laterally. That was it. So I started to see what it was people wanted, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some of that in today's presentation. So that's my goal. Like the first day of high school, if you're not here for that, then sorry. So everybody familiar with the kill chain? Everybody seen this before? I don't have to go into too much detail about this. You don't have to be able to read these blocks right here, do you? Okay, so see the yellow one on the end? Everybody just kind of do this. Really, seriously, go like that. Because what's happening is this kill chain is tipping this way. Okay? I don't get to see a lot of this stuff. Sometimes I can find this. I found this a couple of times. As a forensic analyst, I don't really get to see too much of this. I get to see a lot of this. We have network guys that do this. But most of what I do is involved with this area. So it kind of like tips the kill chain that way. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Because once they're in, there's a lot of activity that occurs. After they get in, that's pretty much it. Everything goes down there, and the entire thing just kind of tips up on its side. So again, lateral movement is movement between systems within this infrastructure, east-west, north-south, however you want to put it. Now, most of the techniques are via the command line. So why does it matter that I've got this bullet on the slide? Why does it matter? Anybody? A hint to where things will be? As an incident responder, when I go on site a lot of times, and I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, but I'm going back to, by now, over 15 years of experience. When I go on site and I want to help somebody, and the first thing I say is open a command prompt, all the hearts in the room stop beating. Nobody blinks. Yeah, I did take, in about 99 or so, I did take the MCSE exams back before they became the adaptive exams. And what I found was it's all based on the GUI. In order to do Operation X, like add a user, you have to click here, click here, click here, click here, and click here. The bad guys do stuff because via the command line because it happens underneath that. You don't see any of that. And it's easy. And what does that also mean? Yes, go ahead.
It can be scripted too.
It can be scripted. It's fast.
Oftentimes no audio.
Really? Come on. Oftentimes? Really? Seriously? You're being very generous, sir. Thank you very much. Well, more importantly, a lot of the bad guys don't have to bring a whole lot with them. If the tools are already there, why not make use of them? And the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of admins that I've dealt with, and I'm not trying to bust on admins because there's a lot of very, very, very knowledgeable folks, very dedicated folks out there, but a lot of the admins that I've dealt with, they don't even know these tools exist. I'll give you a little, a buddy of mine told me to start with a joke today. The stuff that I'm going to share with you is real-world experience, and some of you are going to laugh, and some of you are going to cry, because I know I did. Okay? And so basically, towards the end of the presentation, I put this early in the presentation because we want to keep this in mind. As an incident responder over the past 15 years, one of the things that I really, really look for, I'm really hoping people start employing, is process creation monitoring. Because, yeah, people say, well, ask for logs when you go in. And everybody knows, look for logs, look for logs. I can't tell you the number of times where, I'll give you one great example, and this is not part of the joke package at all. A device was issuing syslog for its logging. Somebody had repurposed the syslog server 2 years prior. So if you put a sniffer on the network, you'd see all this UDP spewing out of a system and not going anywhere. It was on the network, which, the network retained stuff for how long? Okay, so by the numbers. Now, this is a slide I added recently, and this is pretty much the extent of my PowerPoint capabilities with the picture up on the side there. But who here reads the annual reports that come out? Anybody? You know what I mean? M-Trends, DBIR, data breach from Verizon, TrustWave has got one. It's kind of like the thing that cool kids do, right? They have an annual report. So in a lot of the reports, and different reports call it different things. Like, for instance, the Mandiant report calls it median time to detection. Okay, so they want to have a bunch of statistical analysis and things like that. There's other reports refer to this particular metric as dwell time. And basically what this means is that when the incident responders go in, they start looking around. So they're called in on a certain date. And while they're doing their analysis and their investigation, they're able to find indicators that tell them how long the bad guy was there. Does that make sense to everybody? That's kind of what the metric means, right? So there's indicators within the infrastructure somewhere that allow the incident responders to determine how long the bad guys were there. Now, as an experienced incident responder, I know a lot of times you can't get back to the original phishing email. You can get to the earliest known indicator, okay? I've seen things that are 2 years old. I've seen things that are 4 years old. I've seen things that are 6 years old. Very, very strong indicators of somebody having been in at some point, okay? So what I thought was kind of interesting when we're looking at some of this stuff is particularly the M-Trends report, when we're looking at the percent of external notification, the percent of their clients that were identified or were notified of the incident by external notification, 69%. That means somebody outside the infrastructure, FBI, notified the organization of that they had an incident. They didn't know it themselves. They had nothing going on in the infrastructure that told them, hey, this happened. What I think was really interesting about it was the median days to detection was 205, with the longest persistence being over 8 years. Okay, so I'm not sharing this with you to say somebody was in the infrastructure for 8 years. I'm sharing this with you because what this tells me is that, and it should be telling you all, is that these investigators are finding things. They're finding, what's the term we use? Artifacts or? Indicators. Indicators in the infrastructure. There's stuff laying there that they see. Okay, Chris Pogue referred to this, he's now with Nuix, but he used to be with TrustWave, referred to this as expert eyes. You know, people look at things differently based on who they are. Most of us, when we go walking in the woods, we see flowers and stuff like that. You get somebody that's military, they see things differently. You get somebody that's a military sniper, and you don't see them at all, sorry. So, actually, it makes a very good point. Having been in the military, I can't go to like a wedding or a function or anything like that without feeling completely out of place because everything's just not exactly the way it's supposed to be. And maybe it's not military, it's OCD. But what this tells us is that there are artifacts in the infrastructure that those who manage the infrastructure, if they knew about them, could actually find them. Because the fact of the matter is you get guys like me that show up and there's no logs. Okay, so if I don't have logs to look at, then the admins aren't going to be able to look at logs either, right? So there's no logs. So I'm looking at the endpoint, and there's stuff on the endpoint that I can easily find. I'm not talking like in a month of analysis. I'm talking within 4 hours or less. There's things on the infrastructure, within the infrastructure, that are sitting there that tell us these things. Okay, and we're going to talk about some of those in the presentation today. So that's just about enough for the warm-up. So some of the first steps. Common aspects of lateral movement. We have two systems. This is something very, very important to keep in mind. One of the things that I found about the incident response field and digital forensics field is a lack of specificity of language. So there will be a lot of times when somebody will say something, and you'll say, okay, so which system was that? The source or destination system. And you get, is your response. Okay, so with lateral movement, there's always a source and always a destination. Can we agree on that? Anybody disagree? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. Well, we'll go on then. I was ready for a fight. Come on. So, okay, so how does the adversary access the source system itself? There's a couple different ways. They can use web shells. Everybody familiar with what a web shell is? Do I go into any detail? Anybody not know what a web shell is? Put it that way. Okay, because I've got some good pictures of a web shell. The screen's telling me it's on the next slide. We have rats that get on the systems via phish, via strategic web compromise. Now, those are always interesting. Has anybody investigated a strategic web compromise? Those are pretty fascinating. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Remote access via VPN, via RDP. Believe it or not, this happens quite often. I've seen this a number of times, a lot. And I see some folks in the back with yellow shirts, little minions back there laughing. Have you guys seen this too? Banana? What? All the things, yes. We've seen all the things. Yeah, okay, good. So mapping shares. I've seen that quite a bit. Scheduled tasks, this is big. And actually, believe it or not, if they have access via RDP using a browser to collect information. Quick story before we move on to the next slide. I was doing some incident response for a client, and they had a digital forensics and e-discovery department, which was, this guy's an army of one. And pretty much what he did, he was very proud of this, and it helped out a lot. Does anybody here have kids? Anybody? Okay. My kids are your age. Anyway, they put Spectre Pro on a couple of the systems that they knew the bad guys had been accessing. Everybody familiar with Spectre Pro? It pretty much takes like a movie of the desktop, right? So they showed us a movie of the desktop. We actually got to see the bad guy for 15 minutes using a browser to access their intranet. And they're like, well, they're showing us this movie. And he's like, well, what are they looking for? And I was just like, hold on. There it is. Because we saw everything. That was pretty interesting. Some of the stuff you can see if you just have the information available. So there you go. That's a web shell right there. Okay? So web shells are used to gain access to the infrastructure. Usually the way that we see these used is there's a web server, could be IIS, could be Apache, whatever the case may be, sitting on the perimeter. And it's got a vulnerability. Somebody pops the box, put a web shell on it. And many times what we'll see is they'll put a very basic web shell on to begin with, just to get access. And then they'll use that to step up their access, put a more advanced web shell on it. Once they get that on, they get a greater level of control of the system. They'll start pushing other things in. You know, it depends on what kind of access they have available. For instance, if they've got, if there's a SQL server and they can do SQL injection, that's always a great way to get stuff on the system to get in the infrastructure. But that's kind of a door, okay? And what I've seen more often than not is the boxes that are popped are the boxes that nobody knew were running a web server. In fact, in some cases, nobody could identify the system itself. Like, whose is this? Okay, so those things are sitting out there. They're accessible. Some of the things I've seen on a Windows server running Apache and WordPress, a GIF image that had special content to it, added to it. And this is actually what was in it. So they would request the GIF image. And I would like to put log entries up here, but they turned off logging on this web server. They had the error logs, but the interesting thing is in 15 years of doing incident response, one thing that I found is that when the bad guys steal credentials and they use those credentials, they don't make mistakes. Your normal user will miss their password once or twice. That's kind of interesting. The bad guys don't make those mistakes. Can everybody see this? Is the podium in the way? IIS server with an ASPX page on the system. Very simple one-liner was just put in there. You can actually see this in the logs. It gets loaded on the system. Pretty effective. I took the bad words out because I didn't know who was going to be attending today. But sometimes they put easily identifiable stuff in there. Really interesting thing about this stuff is everybody familiar with the find string command on the Windows system? You know, kind of a grep. What's that? Everybody? Nobody? Okay. If you do use, just really quick, if you just kick off from the root of the drive where all the web pages are and look for the word unsafe, you never know what you'll find. Okay. Any questions about that? Usually these things go pretty much undetected. And this is a lot of times how, when they get into the infrastructure, this is a lot of times why they're at a command line level accessing the infrastructure. But the interesting thing is, and I've said this many times before, and I'll keep saying it for years to come, is these guys, these people getting in, are smart enough and dedicated enough that they don't need any additional access to map your infrastructure. They know where your SQL servers are. They know where your Exchange servers are. And when I sit down with the CIO and ask where the critical assets are, oftentimes what we have to do is we have to go follow the bad guy's activity. Because the people that own the information often don't know. And I say often because many times they do. But often they don't know where the critical assets are. If it's in somebody's email, these guys will pull PSTs off of systems. They know where the stuff is. And they can map your entire infrastructure just using the command line, so they don't need any more access beyond this. Okay, you like my graphics? This is not a sales pitch over here. I just pulled the image off the web and it said Dell on it. I don't know about the zigzag. Does anybody know what those things in the middle are? Somebody told me it was a floppy drive. It's got a floppy drive. Okay, so this was an interesting example of a web shell that I investigated. That was pretty fascinating. This loop arrow right here is intended to mean loopback. Basically what they did is they got on a system that had a web server, and they wanted to move to a SQL server. So the system was a web server, so they put a web shell on it, and they had RDP access to the system. So they opened up Internet Explorer and went to localhost to load the web shell. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't at all. Okay? And then they used the web shell to issue SQL injection commands using XP_command shell stored procedure to access the SQL server. Okay? And we were able to put this all together with a lot of the indicators that we had on the system. Can you guess what some of those might be? Remember, they had RDP access. So they were basically on the desktop. Anybody have any thoughts on what we found, what we looked at? No. No. Unfortunately, that'd be my first guess too, but not in this case, no. Browser history. And there's a place in the registry called, a key called, in the user's hive, called, what? Typed URLs. We could see where they're accessing localhost. So we did have logs, not event logs, but we did have logs from the web server on this system. And we also had, well, there wasn't a whole lot of logs on this system. But the most interesting aspect we had, so I kind of gave it away right here, access the web shell with localhost a.aspx. So even though they deleted the web shell itself, we had all these indicators left behind. So there was another file system indicator on IIS servers with ASPX web shells. The first time you access it, the .NET framework creates a page called the name of the web shell .compiled. It actually compiles it. So the bad guys can delete all that stuff, all their web shells, and I've actually seen bad guys come in, put a web shell on, delete it after use, come back a month later, put another web shell on, delete it after use, and keep doing this over and over again because we found these file system artifacts. Okay, but interestingly enough, in this particular case, this bad guy, he had the IE open. He opened up, God, it had to be like 25 tabs in IE. And how did we know that? How did we know the tabs that were open? Say again? No, because this is like after the system's been taken offline and imaged. So we didn't have processes. Good guess, though. Good guess. It's a setting, but not the actual indicator. Is anybody familiar with session restore capability in a browser? Okay, he crashed the browser. When you crash the browser, there's these session restore files that are created. If you understand browser forensics, and it varies depending on the type of browser you're looking at. But for IE, it's in a particular place, and it's an OLE file. Does everybody remember OLE from the old version of Windows back when, well, back a long time ago? So these files were created, but the bad guy never came back and reinstantiated IE to get rid of those files. Because that's all you have to do is reopen IE, and it says, do you want to load your previous session? And if you say yes, it loads it and then gets rid of the files. Okay, so he left them there. So we parsed through these session restore files. We found the commands he issued, which is how we knew this, how he created that he was creating a user. Now, why he did it this way, I've got no idea. Okay, it was very odd that they did it this way, but the fact of the matter is when you take a step back and you look at the responses you guys had, that was my first approach as well. Oh, no, he's doing this. I got to look here and look here and look here. Well, no. They did something different that required us to look someplace else, but the indicators were still on the system. So we had those session restore files to look at and parse apart. We saw the exact commands, and we also had the username and password he was using to access the SQL Server, which he'd gotten from the original web server he got into because it was in the password, the username and password were actually in a config file. So, any questions about that? Usually the biggest question when I finish with this slide is people go, well, why did they do that? I don't know. Maybe they had drink tickets and they started early. I don't know. It could be it. I don't know. Okay, scheduled tasks. Is everybody familiar with scheduled tasks? Everybody familiar with that? Who here uses at.exe to create scheduled tasks in their infrastructure? Okay, we got a couple people. Okay, the reason I ask is I'm not going to put a spotlight on anybody, but I did have a client that I was working with, and the suggestion that we had was it had to do with at.exe. And we made the suggestion to them of what to do, and they said, we're sorry. Oh, the suggestion was remediation. You need to go use the at.exe command and use the /del switch to get rid of the scheduled tasks. And the reason we're doing it, the scheduled task is already run, but if you use the delete command, it'll actually get rid of the indicators. It'll actually remove things like registry keys and things like that. Now, it actually adds an event log entry, but it'll remove files and it will remove registry keys. So we said, just go ahead and get rid of these indicators and just run this command. And the response we got back 3 days later was, we can't run the command because we didn't install it. Like, it was on the installation CD. The bad guys have used it. So this was another example of folks who really didn't understand their infrastructure, didn't understand their assets, their inventories, or their endpoints. And we had just given them a history of what the bad guy was doing, and they said, well, we can't do anything. Our hands are tied because we didn't install this application. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't at all, does it? I'm glad you guys are awake enough to go, no, that doesn't make sense at all. So we got the scheduled task. You can see I stole the icon from clip art. So it requires admin privileges. at.exe is most commonly used. And one of the things we use for classifications of threat groups is if they're using sched tasks instead. Now, the interesting thing is an incident responder, and not a lot of folks know this, is that if you're doing incident response and you're using at.exe to collect a list of the scheduled tasks on a system during live response, collecting that volatile data, the tasks that were created using at.exe will not show up if you use sched tasks. Okay? You can try that on your own system. Create one job using each one, and then run the command to see the list of jobs. You have to run both commands to get the complete list. Okay? And that's something we run into every now and then. Files need to be executed, need to be copied over first if they're not native. What that means is there's something that has to occur before at.exe is used. You have to copy those files over that you want to execute, which means there's going to be other artifacts left. There's other indicators, which this is different from the use of psexec, because psexec, if you've ever used it, will copy those files over for you. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, wow. Maybe you guys know all this stuff. Does anybody want to come up here and give this presentation for me? Okay, scheduled task indicators, part 1. Source system, again, like I said, there's a source system, there's a destination system. So the indicators of the activity on the source system are going to be pretty much, if you're lucky, it's going to be a workstation, and you're going to get a prefetch file. Why does it matter if it's a workstation versus a server? What's that? Exactly. By default, Windows servers are not configured. They can, but they're not configured to do application prefetching. It's a registry setting. That's pretty much the answer to everything, isn't it? It's a registry setting? Yeah. Okay. So the key to detection is process creation monitoring. There's several tools out there. I'll have a slide later. I'm not trying to do a sales pitch. We have a tool that we use that does process creation monitoring. And watching this stuff and lining up the process is absolutely fascinating, because you not only get to see the command being run, you get to see all the other commands being run. Net time to check the time on the remote system. The bad guy checking to see if the task is completed. Reissuing the task. The entire, like if they RAR data up, you get their passwords. It's all right there in the command line. It's pretty cool stuff. Okay, so I'll push the process creation monitoring over and over again. One thing, you can install Carbon Black. I've talked to some folks that have gone down.
Hello, I'm Geek here. Unfortunately, we had a little video snafu, and the AVImedia decided to give up the ghost. Luckily, Foz was there, and I was watching the stream, so I came back and we got it back up and running. But we're missing a little bit of video here and audio as well. So if you fast forward to about the 29-minute, 19-second mark, things should start up again. Sorry for the technical glitches.
Right? You've seen this before. You do this all the time. Really? So the sugar rush from the donuts is kind of crashing now? Okay. All right. Some key points for detection. Okay, what you want to do is you want to look for clusters of indicators, not individual indicators. The problem that you have with individual indicators, and this is a problem I have with a lot of the threat intelligence that's out there now, is that most of the threat intelligence looks for individual indicators. What you want to look for is TTPs or clusters of indicators. Because there's a lot of things that go on within an infrastructure that if you look at them in isolation of everything else, they could be threat actor activity. Because a lot of the stuff we see the threat actors doing is stuff that a normal admin might do. Okay? So you want to look at the clusters of activity. You want to look at if a process is created that seems suspicious, when was it created? What was the time? Was it when somebody was at work or was it off hours? You want to look at things like in the command line, passwords that were used. You want to look for all these different clusters of indicators. So you want to go to different sources. You want to look at your event log. You want to look at your registry. You want to look at your file system. The list kind of goes on depending on what you're looking at. It's even more detailed if they have RDP access to your infrastructure. Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or any questions or comments about indicators? Yes, sir.
Well, it's related to indicators.
Okay.
You didn't preface any of this with mentioning whether or not you're working off of forensics copies or whether or not you're doing it on a live network and live systems.
It could be either one.
What makes a difference from an attorney's perspective?
Well, I don't normally deal with attorneys. Because the fact of the matter is most of the organizations I work with, we go in and, of course, the first thing, this is kind of a segue, but I'll go ahead and take it anyway. A lot of the folks I work with will say, I go in and I say, okay, sir, I'm here to help. What is it that you want? And then what is the answer? No, it's even, no, it goes beyond that. The first answer I usually get from the C-level executives is, I want to know who did this. I want their head on a pike out in front of the lunchroom so everybody can see it. That's what they want. So when you sit there and you say, so you want to prosecute and therefore make this part of the public record, they look at their attorney and the attorney's going like that, So then you start to get to questions like, am I compromised? What did I lose? How much did I lose? That's when those questions start to come. The emotion comes in first. The vast majority, I haven't done PCI exams for a long time, and I won't admit ever having done that outside this. Oh, crap, it's been recorded, hasn't it? Anyway, so I don't really work in the area with attorneys. I'm there to help collect information, get answers, things like that. And when I give my answers to my clients, I have data to back it up. It's not a swag. It's not a guess. I have hard data to back it up. Okay, so if we do deal with forensic images, that's great. There's stuff that others can go back and look at. But the other thing I have to deal with is the fact that if my client had the capability to do this, he wouldn't be asking me. So it could be, my goal is to get the answers as quickly as possible so that we can start addressing things and move people beyond that emotional reaction, that panic reaction into, okay, we've got to get people beyond the, okay, I'm going to lose my job. Okay? I've been asked before, why don't you show up with like a little jacket that says like FBI on the back? And the answer is because you don't want people to know that I'm here. I want to blend in with your staff so I look like folks that are here because you don't want people to know what's happening, what's going on. And it's not just from a public perception, it's the IT staff as well, because if I'm there, a lot of times, I'm working not just with the CIO, I'm battling the IT staff because they think that I'm there to take their job. Okay? So my goal is to do knowledge transfer, to help the company out, get them back on their feet, get them past that emotional and panic point, and get them to where they can start answering the questions, and then where they can sit down and take stock of what's actually happened. I've seen... In the time that I've done incident response, there's been a couple times where I've actually been able to recover the raw archives that were taken, and we had the passwords because we had the process creation monitoring in place. We got the password. Some of the stuff that I've seen taken, I mean, the actual 90% of the time that you'll see it in the papers, it's a guess. Okay, I've actually seen it. What's been taken. It's pretty scary. People put 15, 20 years into developing something, and it's gone. Somebody else has it. So. To answer your question, I don't work with attorneys that much. I have worked with law enforcement on the side. Okay, I find stuff. I show them how I found it. They get the pleasure of dealing with attorneys. Any other thoughts, comments? Yes, sir.
So with remote connections, do you know about the setting of the file execution?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, who doesn't? What? What about it? I think you just did.
All right.
No, hold on. So what's the question?
What kind of redness do you see from?
There's the actual registry key being set. And if you have process creation monitoring in effect, like for instance, a great example is sticky keys. Does everybody know what sticky keys is? Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah. So just a quick segue. One of the guys I work with found a tool that sticky keys was pointed to as its debugger. And there was so instead of pointing to cmd.exe, it was a completely different binary. And he pulled the string no out of the binary. So he called the attack sticky no. And I was like, please make this his nickname. And I really pushed it, but apparently it didn't stick. Is everybody familiar with sticky keys? What the attack is? So basically the idea is there's a key in the registry called image file execution options with spaces between all the words. And the idea is that Microsoft left this in place so that you could add, well, you or anybody else could add debugging capability to binaries. So you can go in, for instance, and say anytime Notepad is launched, launch Word instead, or WordPad. So whoever tries to launch Notepad, boom, it'll launch WordPad instead. Okay, that's interesting capability. What the bad guys will do sometimes is they have remote access to the system. This plays right into the whole lateral movement thing, so we're just not off topic here. You actually remotely connect to the system. You modify the key. It's pretty easy to do. There's a command line utility in all Windows systems called reg.exe that makes this really super easy to do. And what you do is you take there's a couple of accessibility tools, sethc.exe and utilman.exe. You can do either one. And you go in and you create a subkey, and you point the debugger value for that subkey to cmd.exe. And then the bad guy leaves. So if you change all the passwords in your infrastructure and the bad guy can still access the infrastructure, all he has to do is RDP to that system. When it gets the screen up, instead of putting in credentials, he just hits the shift key 5 times, and he gets a system-level command prompt. Yeah, exactly. What? So you change your passwords, you think you've gotten rid of him. He's got a rat, he gets back in, and he's able to get access all over again because he gets that system-level command prompt. Remember, I said from the beginning, these guys use command line tools. They can do anything. Create users, change passwords, dump passwords. And what I don't see a lot of is actually making a lot of like esoteric registry setting changes and things like that, other than like sticky keys and a couple of things. But so there's other things that you can do with this particular attack. I've seen the penetration testing guys will have a variation that they use. But basically, the whole idea of this particular key is whatever you point to as the debugger gets launched instead of that application. If you're using it with the sticky keys approach, because of how it's launched, that command prompt is now running at system-level privileges. So I'll let you guys look at that slide afterwards. OK. One of the last ones I've got is what I refer to as a sleeper agent. I actually did a blog post for the SecureWorks research blog. This was pretty interesting. The bad guy was already in and had moved laterally throughout the infrastructure using at.exe to push his rat out to all these different systems. I think at one point we found on one day there was like 9 different systems. And this is like the month of April, beginning of April. And then we saw something interesting. Now follow me here. 2 days later, he pushes out a copy of his rat installer to another system, but he doesn't do it with AT. He mapped to the system, mapped a drive, and copied it. So he did net use, mapped to the drive, and then he copied it. And where he copied it to was the setup folder for an admin user. So the admin profile had already been created. The admin had already logged in at one point, sometime. So he reached out to this particular user profile and copied the installer into the startup folder. Now at that point, what did we have? What's that? Well, we had a file sitting there. That's all we had, because it's the installer just sitting there. But it's an indicator. What happened was, during the incident response, and this is one of those things that's so simple, it's pure genius. During the incident response, this client had said, no, we don't use communal admin accounts. Every one of us has our own user account, and we have our own by name administrator account. Well, guess what? They used a communal admin account. And they reached out to this system and logged in using this particular admin account. At that point, because they logged in and the installer was sitting up in the startup folder without any other interaction from that user other than logging in, the rat was installed. It was sitting there for over 8 months doing nothing until an action occurred that, and I got to tell you, having been in the military, when somebody comes up to me and says, we never do this, and when they're that emphatic, you know they just did it. And they're going to do it in 5 minutes. And we had the evidence. I mean, we had the clear evidence, so we knew what was going on. So the point wasn't to like hammer them and say, okay, you use an admin account. We did put that in our recommendation, was don't use communal admin accounts. But these guys put that installer. It sat out there for 8 months. It had a different configuration. It had a different C2, which meant that all the MD5 hashes that people were using up until that point didn't detect this. Because you're all familiar with the pyramid of pain? You know where hashes sit on the pyramid of pain, right? On the very bottom? Okay. So they were scanning the infrastructure with these hashes. They weren't finding it. Because even though the file was a similar name, and it did the same thing, it had a different C2. So computationally and mathematically, it was a different file. So the computer goes, nope, that's not it, and moves on. It sat there until somebody logged in, launched it, and then we started to see the indicators. When we went back and we looked at that system, the first thing we had to do is say, well, when was our endpoint agent installed? Oh, it was installed this day, and that's when we saw it. Well, what happened was, when the admin logged into that system to install our endpoint agent, that login caused the rat to be installed. So when our endpoint agent got on it and scanned it, it said, whoa, dude, there's a rat on this system. Like, okay, well, when did it get there? Why did we miss it before? Why didn't we catch it? You know, why didn't we catch any of this stuff in the network logs? It's because until that point, it was dormant. So imagine that. This is how forward-thinking these guys were. They're going to leave something, a little special treat, and it sat there for 8 months. And the reason they left it there, the best I can come up with is, we found all their other stuff. They are familiar with our incident response techniques and capabilities. They see all of us saying MD5 hashes are the greatest thing in the world, and they took advantage of it. Is anybody scared at this point? Raise your hand if you're scared, because I'm scared. Yeah, this stuff is pretty fascinating. You familiar with the movie? You know what that's from? You game over, man. Bill Paxton, the greatest B actor ever. What's that? Well, Bruce Campbell's kind of a different genre, you know. But, you know, Bill Paxton, opening scenes to Terminator, right? When Schwarzenegger was walking naked down the street, Bill Paxton was there. And Aliens. This is great because, you know, the cable system around my neighborhood, it's like the entire week I would turn it on and go through the movie channels. If I was getting ready to work out, I'd see Aliens, and Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection, you know, all throughout the day. So this is pretty good because, you know what? For all intents and purposes, it's pretty much game over. They're in your infrastructure. Is this correct? Is it game over? Is it? What? No, it's not. Yeah, no comment. I'm going to wait to see what that guy says. No, it's not. We need to change the definition of success. What is success for the bad guy? Is it what's that? Exfiltration. If you can detect them prior to exfiltration, then, and you can cut them off, even though they're inside your network, okay, do we win? Yeah. If they can't get what they want out, let me ask you something. The Great Wall of China, massive feat of engineering. What was the purpose? What? No. Keep people in. Because when you come in and loot a country like China and you're trying to cart all that loot away, how are you going to get it over the wall? Seriously. Go ahead, come on in. Does prevention work? No, prevention doesn't work. What do you need? You need detection and response, right? So detection is key. Okay, if we get that endpoint agent out there and monitor process creation on the endpoints, yeah, it's going to be a big database. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of other uses for the data besides just security and incident response. It's a lot of very valuable data. And more importantly, once you start looking in those areas and you start looking at clusters of indicators, this stuff is easy to pick out. It's like going to the supermarket, and there's a whole thing of apples and there's a tomato in the middle. Yeah, it's a fruit, right? You eat it. You kind of put it in salad. People put apples in salads, right? It's got all this, it's very similar, but the fact of the matter, it's different enough that you can pick it out. The same thing with the bad guys activity. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions? Am I completely wrong? Because, I was in a cab this morning. I just made this presentation up on the way over. Any comments? I was going to leave like 20 minutes for questions. How are we doing on time, by the way?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. I left a lot of time. Well, okay.
So what are you doing for tablets?
For tablets. Nothing right now because they come and go. They're in the infrastructure. They're not. They're physically in the infrastructure, but they're not connected to the network. There are solutions out there that you can use. I don't know that Dell SecureWorks is doing anything specific for tablets. There's a gentleman down here you can ask. don't want to put the spotlight on you, but
You said prevention doesn't work, right?
I did. Hold on, let me get this slide up because it's really cool. You like that? I like that one a lot. Anybody know who that is? Kevin Smith, right?
But like in the rat tool instance, it would have worked, right?
In the what instance?
The rat tool you said that you used in startup.
Uh-huh.
It would have worked.
Depending on what you're calling prevention. What are you calling prevention at that point?
Black you got up there. So if you're whitelisting, then obviously it wouldn't be a whitelisted software that would have worked. So I guess it has a piece. I just if you wanted to explain that.
Wow. Yeah, sure, I guess. What's that? Well, yeah, you can change it, but if you whitelist applications, anything that's not on that whitelist isn't going to run. But it sort of goes back to the detection as well, because if you whitelist applications and you get an alert that something ran, yeah, it didn't run. But with moving the rat over, it's just an MSI. It's just sitting there. It's not trying to execute, and so it's just sitting there. So I can see your point if you have that capability. I think the thing is I don't ever see anybody with the capability. Because who's going to maintain the whitelist?
Well, that's what Carvey Black's for, right?
No?
And Bit9's for, I mean.
Well, Bit9 has that capability, but that's not what Carbon Black's for.
And then the device card for Windows 10's coming out, which
I-
has kind of doing that as well. I'm just asking.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I don't know.
Because it has built-in app whitelisting.
Yeah, but that goes back to my question, though. Who maintains that whitelist? Yeah.
Well, even with whitelist, you can still inject a process into that.
Yeah. You can still do process injection. So this is the way I see it. And please correct me if I'm wrong. It's kind of like each individual company, each individual private sector company having its own hash list. Who's going to maintain that? You set up a help desk and you start to do application whitelisting. What's going to happen to your help desk? It's going to explode. Because even though you send out the messages and you do all the training and you say this is the authorized applications, I'm just like you guys. I'm a user. I have to take the training, and when I've got the training on, I'm going through my annual training that I have to go through, and the little thing is talking to me, wah 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 wah. So imagine like in a company like the size of Oracle or size of GE, all of those users sitting doing the same thing, and then they want to run an application that's not on the whitelist, but they're not thinking it's not on the whitelist. So what do you maintain a whitelist by staffing out your help desk to answer those questions and do the help desk response, or do you lock it down and it's just a mess? I have not yet met anybody that's done whitelisting. I'm not saying they're not out there. I'm not saying that folks aren't successful doing it. I have yet to meet somebody because of the type of work that I do that actually has whitelisting or even blacklisting. I have never seen that. So the capabilities are out there, but the question I've got is how do they get maintained? So that's a good question, though. I mean, it's all part of the technology that's available to us. So why not use it, right? But then it's this. Here's another way to look at it. Windows event logs with Windows 7. How many Windows event logs are on Windows 7? I did a DIR at one point on a fresh install. I had like 141 or 142 files. Not all of them populated, obviously, but a lot of files. So we got all these logs out there. I have yet to see a place that does central correlation of all those logs from each individual workstation.
Do you see people doing logging from workstations as well? I mean, I know people do, core servers, critical servers, sometimes network devices.
I saw one.
Rarely workstations.
Yeah. So the question was, for those of you in the back, does anybody do centralized logging on workstations? I saw one that did it. They only centralized the security event logs, and they had a GPO issue in their infrastructure, so that all they had these massive security event logs that all had one event ID in it. That basically all that they were literally, the security event logs were full of one log entry that said that the GPO had been changed. There was an issue in their infrastructure. All of this stuff was being centrally logged. So the only time I've seen somebody do central logging from workstations at all, that was the setup. And they weren't aware of it. So going back to the whitelisting, okay, who's going to maintain it? Who's going to monitor it?
Okay, you have the same problem that when you said, well, who's going to maintain a whitelist? Who's going to look through your process creation logs? Think about how many processes create.
Yeah, but that's easy. That's easy. You create watch lists. You have the computer do it for you. And that's where the part, having worked with organizations to set up incident response capability, it really comes down to this basic thing. The reason I gave this presentation today, and by the way, that's so cool. The reason I gave this presentation today is I constantly hear, well, what does that look like? What do I look for in my infrastructure? So if you go back a couple slides, I'll pass that one, well, look, here's a whole list. And here's another list. This is stuff to look for. You've got these. These are, print these slides out. So when you're doing incident response and people are saying, okay, it's great, we got these logs, what do we look for? The first question I ask is, do you use at.exe in your infrastructure? 9 times out of 10, it's, huh? What's that? Okay, good. That's a no. So pretty much the bad guy is going to be the one using it. Okay, because pretty much in most infrastructures, 10 minutes, okay. Patty cake. Most infrastructures, the only scheduled tasks they have are like Google updates and the Adobe software updater, right? And then, yeah, I guess if somebody puts iTunes in, there's the Apple updater. But beyond that, pretty much, I see very few organizations using AT for anything.
Wouldn't that be a prevention then? You just say no to that and you're ready?
Well, it's a prevention, okay? And a great way to do the prevention, and this, I go into that image file execution options registry key, create a subkey for at.exe, and point it to a batch file that sends you an email. So anytime the bad guy tries to run at.exe, it doesn't run. And every time he tries, it sends you an email that it's being used. Okay, so that's a prevention and a detection technique right there. But if you haven't gotten that far yet, if you haven't gotten to that point, what can you look for in the infrastructure? Well, there's all these places you can go. One event log file out of 140, and depending on if it's a domain controller, 160, 70 some odd event logs. There's one event log file that you need to go to look for some of these indicators. And if you're not already including that in your Splunk instance, start doing it. Start collecting that information. Okay? So there's a lot of detection stuff that you can do that's pretty easy if you know what to look for. Yes, sir?
So what's your next favorite place to look for lateral movement if, say, the event logs are clear but just not turned on?
Well, it really depends on the kind of lateral movement we're looking for. By default, on Windows 7 systems, the event logs are turned on. I understand what you're saying about particular auditing, but the stuff that's included in default as of Windows 7 is almost sufficient. Just the stuff that's running there by default. Looking for lateral movement, my second favorite place is to go back to the first one and really, really wish people installed process creation monitoring of some kind. because that picks up the net use, that picks up the AT, it picks up the DIRs that are run. We've had a lot of bad guys, interestingly enough, leave their batch files sitting around. So when the client says, I want to know what systems were affected, like if the bad guy pushed out Mimikatz, everybody familiar with Mimikatz? Okay, bad guy pushes out Mimikatz across systems. This guy did it with a batch file. So he used one executable to give me a list of all the systems in the infrastructure, and then he used the output of that tool to feed into a batch file. That batch file took every system name, mapped the drive, pushed out Mimikatz, launched Mimikatz, brought back the results, and then deleted the Mimikatz files. We had his entire script right there, literally and figuratively. So when the client said which systems were infected, here's the bad guy's output. These were the affected systems. But not everybody does that. Not everybody leaves their batch files and their output files sitting behind. Some clean up behind themselves, some more than others. In fact, with some of the incident response that I've done, I was able to see using a timeline, which is a completely different presentation. Using a timeline, I was able to see that one threat actor came on at 3 a.m. UTC, and then a completely different person started logging in at 11 a.m. UTC. And when I say completely different set of activities. First guy comes in, hits a system, first thing he does is open the PowerShell command prompt. We couldn't see what he did with it because we didn't have process creation monitoring. He moved on to other things. The guy that came on at 11 a.m. UTC had a completely different MO. He was all about the event logs, grabbing security event logs, clearing event logs, doing things like that. So there's a lot of indicators. Going back to those annual reports, okay, they're telling us something. What they're not telling us is what are those analysts looking at that allow them to determine a median time to detection or a dwell time of 205 days or 8 years. What are they looking at? Because there's something there. Is anybody asking the question, how do you know? They're probably taking it on faith. But there's something there that's telling these guys, whether it's Mandiant FireEye, whether it's SecureWorks, whether it's TrustWave, whoever it is, there's something there that's telling them and giving them this information that they can base their statistics on. Okay? So hopefully this presentation will have some of those things in it for you. Thank you very much, guys.